Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yep.
Okay, good. So I suppose you see the screens pretty well, and it looks it looks like we are now in the 8th session for the IETF 109. So I propose we start. So in case you have never seen the notewells, please note that this meeting is under the notewell, so take the time to read those. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or any other person. Before we start this meeting, I would like, you notice that I have the only chair now opening this meeting, and I would like that we for at least 1 minute we just think a little bit of Jim Shad that passed away recently and left us. But before we do this silent minute, I might invite our AD to take a few words.
Thank you, Danielle, and it's indeed quite a loss to us all to lost Jim. Jim really was quite an exceptional individual, and that extends, of course, to the breadth of his involvement in the IETF. He's been involved in quite a lot of things, and of course, he predates me. I've only been in the IETF for about 8 years, and when I came in, he was already an old hand. But he was definitely always willing to offer advice, even to young, fresh faces like I was at the time. I do know, his hands were on many of the foundational RFCs for things like CMS or some of the crypto algorithms, and I came to rely on him for PKIX questions. I did get to work with him pretty closely during my own time as co-chair of ACE, and he was sort of a mentor to me during that time. Got to learn more about how the IETF works and got to work on my own skills. And then I was only ACE co-chair for a few months before I got promoted to being AD, but I was still responsible AD for ACE, so I got to spend time in the working group, and I got to appreciate really how much time and energy Jim would put into the technology and the documents, just trying to make everything really as good as it could be. As an AD, I got to see a broader view, a broader appreciation of Jim's role and all that he did for the IETF. I'm still not sure I got a full view of what he did for the IETF, because I'm sure there are things that he did that I don't know about. But I can definitely say that his efforts were not limited to just the security area. They were not limited to a class of technology. He really was quite well-rounded. And I'm happy to say that I was able to watch Jim mentor countless individuals in the IETF. That was another way in which he served us all. He was helping people, getting the technology right and get the process details and navigating the process itself, which can be complex. He was just so incredibly selfless and generous in his time and his expertise. I certainly relied on him for many things. I know others did as well. And it's sort of strange to think that he was just so selfless and so helpful that the only time that he really felt the need to say, no, I can't help you right now, was actually at the winery during the pressing season. It was just too busy at the winery, so he couldn't do the IETF stuff. But when that season was over, of course, he was back to being our Jim and helping us out and getting things into place. So I can say I will miss him very much. I know that we all will. So, thank you, Jim.
Okay. I propose that for we observe a 1 minute of silence, and then we will start this meeting. Thank you. So let's move to the agenda. We probably need a minute taker. I can try to do the JavaScript while presenting. You don't need to sign the blue sheets. But do we have a minute taker? Okay, thank you, Ben, for looking at the Jabber. It would be good we have someone volunteering for taking the minutes. We can be more than one person. Okay, thank you, Gura. I'm just putting the link to the minutes. So we have a few drafts to be presented that are work in progress that are going to be presented. We have the charter to be discussed, and we also have new topics. And before we start the presentation, I'd like to do a little bit of a status regarding the current drafts. So we have still one draft, which is the ACE Co-op East, that is in the RFC editor queue. There is a missing reference. If I remember correctly, that's the DTLS 1.3, but it's soon to be published, this one. So I think we are, this draft is going to be published quite soon. It's a question of month, I would say. We also have a bunch of documents that's waiting for ISG approval to be sent to the RFC editor. One, which is the DTLS authorized. I believe this one is pretty much ready to be sent. We had just yesterday or today, depending on time zone, the last version of OAuth drafts that addressed all the comments we received. It was in a working group last call. And we have also the OAuth param that is being waiting for some time also. To me, all those drafts seems ready, and we have the last one that needs to be complete is the OS core profile that has just been updated. There is a working group last call on it. But as far as I know, I haven't seen any reviews for now. So it would be really appreciated that we got reviews to avoid the draft to be moved forward and then be called back for subsequent changes. So I am encouraging the co-author and additional persons to review this draft before we can submit it to the IHG. We are waiting for the security directorate review, so we expect at least one review, but we would like more. Anyone planning to review that document?
Christian Amsus will do.
Marco here. I'm planning also by Monday.
Okay. So I haven't heard the first person.
Christian Amsus.
Okay. Great.
And also, hi, Francesca. I just wanted to say that looking at the diff for whoever has already reviewed it should be enough, but the diff is not huge, so the review shouldn't take a long time.
Yeah, so the diff is one thing, but it would be good that we can ensure the document is current and all that. So I would not discourage anyone to review the full document. Okay, so I think, yeah, and so we also have documents in progress. So one is the AIF. So I don't know if Carsten wants to say a few words on this one. If you are speaking, I cannot hear you.
Yeah, it must be a local or hardware mute that Karsten has on, because he shows up in Mute Echo as speaking. Or he did. He dropped off.
Okay, so Carsten, as soon as it's fixed, please show up. So we have the GroupCom drafts that are going to be presented, and we also have the pub subs. So we have the MQTT TLS profile. So I am not sure Signem is attending the meeting, but so I don't see her. So if she's not here, I can't do the status of that document. We had a working group last call. All comments have been addressed, and what remains to be addressed is really to look at the needs. There are some versions of draft that raise some warnings, and basically there are some informative document in the normative section. So it's really ready to be sent to the ISG. We have another draft, which is the ACE pub sub profile that has not been updated since the last IETF. I'm wondering if any of the co-authors are willing to say a few words on this draft.
Maybe, Carsten, do you want to go ahead first for ACE?
Yeah. So I pressed various buttons here.
I don't see you. So
There are error messages coming from Meet Echo, which are going away before you have a chance to read them. So you have no idea what's going on. Anyway, so AIF essentially has been stable for half a decade until we recently added the idea of inheritance to it. So I think people haven't really looked at inheritance a lot. And maybe people haven't implemented inheritance yet in their various protocols. So I think it would be useful to get some feedback about that. Of course, we can finish this draft without inheritance, but it sounded like a good way to solve various problems that we were having with post actions. So please have a look about that.
So basically, your comment is that you're looking for review of the current version of the document. Okay. Okay.
And
so yeah. Oh yeah, please, Francesca.
Yeah, no. So that has gone to yeah. I have been prioritizing the OSCO profile and the ACE key group com stuff, which is why it hasn't been updated. But it's still missing sections in the document about MQTT. So that's why that's what's missing right now. So
Okay.
it's in plan to update this and collaborate with SIGDEM to do that. But
okay,
we have.
But so I guess that for the next IETF, we can expect this draft to be sent to the ISGA.
I don't know to the ISG, but progressed, yes. And then it depends on how much work there is in the OSCO profile.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. So I propose now we start the presentation. Maybe Francesca, we may start with the group communication. I think that's the first one.
Yes, sounds good. Thank you. Let me send you as well. Good morning, everyone. It's dark outside. So key provisioning for group communication using ACE. This is version 10 that has been and next slide, please. So just a quick recap, if you haven't seen this before, this keys and key for group members that want to join a group, and it uses the ACE framework in the first part of the exchange, so the authorization request, response, and a token post. And then it defines other operations between the client and the KDC, which means Key Distribution Center, to join the group. So in this figure, it's only about the group joining, request and response, but there is more operations that are defined. Yes, and after that, the client can do secure group communication. So this document is complemented by the one that Marco will present later, which is about ACE key group com OSCORE, and defines the additional information for a node to join an OSCORE group. So this is a general one that cannot be implemented by itself and needs what we call application profiles. So next slide, please. Since IETF109, a lot has happened. We have submitted version 9 based on a follow-up review from Jim, which we discussed at IETF109 and closed 24 issues, if I'm not wrong. And then also Christian gave us a review. Thank you for that, Christian. And we have done a pull request and submitted the next version, version 10. based on that review. And you can see the details in the GitHub. Next slide, please. So the goal for version 10 is that hopefully it will make it easier for implementers to actually understand and implement this document. So we have added co-op message examples for all exchanges, which I think was a great idea. We should have done it way earlier. We added example for how to calculate the input to the signature. We try to remove as much as possible text that was duplicated from either the ACE framework or from other sections of the document. And then there was some minor changes modify the error code if a client is not a member of the group and is trying to access resources that are dedicated members from 400 bed request. Bunch of clarifications that were made. So today I want to talk about one issue. Next slide, thank you. One issue that is about the scope encoding. And this came from a comment from Christian again, thank you. And while we were talking about this, we realized maybe this is a more general problem that is valid for a resource server which is supporting several profiles or application profiles. So this is the scenario. You have a KDC, key distribution center, which acts as a resource server for all the resources which are accessible via other profiles of ACE. For example, OSCORE profile. So the client sends a post token to the KDC, and the scope is encoded. The scope in the token is encoded as a CBOR byte string. And the question is, how does the KDC know what is the actual format of scope? Because, for example, in our ASCII group com document, it's a CBOR byte string, but it's actually a CBOR array wrapped in a CBOR byte string. So how does the KDC know how to actually parse the scope? And how does the KDC know which profile of ACE the resource server is being posted a token for before being able to access the scope? So yeah, so this is the problem that we were dealing. Two or three possible solutions. So the first solution is to solve this locally. So to prefix the scope with a byte, and this byte will indicate which application profile of ACE is being used. And to make this effective, this needs to be agreed, of course, between a resource server and authorization server. And if the same scope is reused for several resource servers, they need to sync this value of this byte for each application profile with the authorization server. Another solution could be to actually register a CBOR tag, one for each different encoding of scope or for application profile. This has the drawback that this will be longer than prefix, local or locally agreed prefix. Maybe only 1 byte. It depends on how big of a CBOR tag we would go for. So for now, we only can see that we would register a CBOR tag only for the ASCII group OSCORE profile, because this is the only application profile we have. But later on, we would have one for each application profile encoding. And the question is it too much to have one CBOR tag for each application profile. So again, this CBOR tag would indicate, okay, this scope is formatted in the way defined in that draft. And another way that this could also be done is by registering a new token claim that tells you the encoding of the scope for that token. So the token itself contains a claim that is indicating the format of scope. And this has the same problem or drawbacks as registering a CBOR tag. I wanted to point out that these solutions are not they could be used in parallel. So we could describe both in our document. So we could register a tag and at the same time describe in appendix how either a prefix or a tag could be used. And then depending on the applications, the implementer might want to use one or the other. But it would give them the opportunity to choose. So I don't know if this was clear.
So
does anybody have opinions?
Are you asking the working group to state some preferences? I understand you go with the prefix. And
well, I think our proposal would be to actually allow for both, either a prefix or a tag, and then let the implementers decide if they want to use either or both or none. In some cases, you might not need to even indicate encoding of a scope because you already know you're only using that type of, yeah. But I'm asking the working group to give, if they have an idea, an opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I understand the problem yet, but there is a word on this slide that makes me nervous, at least the first time it occurs. It's the word same. So how do the various parties find out that some scope is the same? I think this is the whole problem we are talking about. And well, if you negotiate a namespace, you essentially need to have had a namespace in place already to enable that negotiation, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah. So how do the resource servers and the authorization server do the discussion about whether a scope is the same or not? They already need a namespace to do this in.
So this bullet would be in the case where a token, same token, is reused with several resource servers, which is a case that is allowed by the ACE framework. So it's described there. So it's not only the same encoding that is used, it's actually the same exact value because the same token.
The same exact value doesn't imply same encoding. So you cannot discuss whether you are using the same encoding by just looking at the values. You need to discuss the encoding as well. So you already need to have a namespace for doing that.
Yeah, and that's the assumption with the prefix solution. How do you do that? Thought about if you use a prefix and then you need to think about that you need to sync your resource servers and the AES and agree beforehand.
Ben has another take on the same thing, so I shut up now.
Let's see what that says. there is same in the sense of knowing what email, offline access, etc. mean, and then there is same in the sense of knowing that it's encoded as a CBOR byte string containing a CBOR array containing individual text strings or whatever. Yes. Yeah, it requires synchronization. That's out of scope. To use.
Yeah, just to jump in the audio, this is Ben Kadek again. So my understanding is that the sort of knowing what the email and offline access and whatnot mean, that's definitely out of scope for this document. And certainly in the auth world, you just have like an out-of-band agreement as to what those mean. And so my understanding, we're talking about the other one.
Well, that's the thing. In the ACE world, you kind of assume
Right.
So you need to indicate in some way you can actually parse it, and then from there you know what you're using.
Yes.
So,
and so I guess
so either with
I'm not sure if
information. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, I will go. So I'm not sure if this is exactly the question that Karsten was trying to raise, but when you're in the scenario where you have some things that are already agreed to out of band, and then you're talking about, do I need to add a inbound mechanism to disambiguate something else? You have to ask yourself, is this something else that I'm trying to disambiguate, something that could be agreed out of band as well? Because I already have this out of band mechanism. And my understanding is that the answer is no, that we do need an in-band mechanism here, because the sort of knowing what email means that we say is out of band, that's like a universal constant in some sense. And the particular encoding used by the different profiles is something that can change and you won't know a priori.
Exactly.
So I think we do need some mechanism here, whether it's to have a byte prefix or a CBOR tag. I think both of those would work.
Yeah. And Daniel, if you could go back one slide, just to go on the slide on the issue itself rather than the solution. Yeah, that's what you said, Ben, is that this happens when the client sends a post token and the KDC or resource doesn't have other information about what application profile the client is posting that token for. So, yeah, but I don't know if anybody else so we talked about this in a side meeting with Christian and Marco. I don't know if they want to add anything, if I missed something, or anybody else has opinions. Or even, Carsten, if you have opinions about.
I need to think about this some more, because I'm not entirely sure what the various uniqueness requirements here are, and what the consequence of not achieving uniqueness actually are, and what the attack vectors are, and so on. So I think I have to take this offline. But generally, I think registering CBOR tags is something that you can easily do. Registering 1 byte, CBOR tags, well, there are only so many of them. So I wouldn't be too optimistic that
no, we wouldn't go for 1 byte. The +1 meant it's probably 1 more byte than the prefix, which is at least 1 byte. So it's at least 2 bytes. And Ben, you're in the queue as well?
Take myself out of the queue. Sorry.
Okay. So yeah, I guess we'll try to write down this problem with Christian and Marco and send it to the mailing list to see if we can get more discussion.
I see one advantage of prefix is the length, 1 byte.
Yeah.
But is that something that is really important, or can we live with 2 bytes, or?
The length here is not
Okay.
the matter, because we're already sending the token.
Yeah.
So it's not gonna. That's not gonna make a difference, 1 byte in this case. It's more about what is simpler for, or what is more convenient for implementers. In some cases, as I said, in some cases, you don't even need to have an indication of what scope you're using, because maybe you're only using 1 application profile. You have already communicated with that with the AS. So it might not be needed, but in some other cases, you might need it, and it might be one or the other. Okay, yeah. Thank you. I think
so. One comment from Ben on the Jabber, and well, that's easy to say after. I had the same intuition that might be using CBOR might be cleaner than a byte. Mm-hmm. Do you have any?
It might be, but then yeah, in some cases it might not be necessary to use CBOR tags. It's yeah, okay. But I will try to summarize this issue or the problem statement and get the discussion in the mailing list.
Or pick one.
And then to the last slide, plan forward. So I guess the first point should be talk more about this scope encoding problem and solution. We have some other minor clarification to do. We want to definitely submit a new version before we can think about moving forward to working group last call.
Okay, sounds great. Any comments on that from the working group? I'm seeing no one. So be ready to review that document soon. I mean, version 11. When do you think are you planning to submit version 11 before the end of the year?
Depending on how the conversation goes about this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we have any version.
Then I think it's Marco, the next presentation. Thank you, Francesca.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good morning or evening. So this is Marco. This is an update of an application profile of ACE, building on ACE key group count that Francesca presented to enable authorized joining to OSCORE groups. Next slide, please. Right, just as a quick recap, here a node that is interested in joining an OSCORE group contacts an authorization server to get an access token as an evidence of being authorized to be a group member with a particular role or set of roles. token is posted, and what follows is joining request, joining response exchange, and especially the ACE client here gets in return the key material needed later on in the group to communicate with other group members. And the focus is really about that, getting authorization to get into the group and get the group key material. Other things like communication in the group or accessing resources of group members are out of scope of this document. They are covered somewhere else. Next slide, please. Okay, some updates in this version 2. Aligning with keygroup.com, we have also had the renaming of the main resource path to the group manager from group OSCORE to ACE group to keep it more general anyway. And following also new content and requirements introduced in ACE keygroup.com, we have also provided a summary of the methods intended to be used by a node at every resource or sub-resource, and depending on that exact type of node. So member or not member yet, and depending on the exact roles it has or can have in the group. So it's summarized also in this table extracted from the draft. In the previous version already, we introduced one more operation on the very root resource ACE group, where the payload is the current group ID of the group, and what's returned is the invariant group name for that group, useful for other operations. And we realized in keygroup.com already that that's something useful not only for group members, but in general for other possible roles like the verifier here. If really missing possible recurring operations and a change of group ID values, this is useful for verifiers too, to have an idea, oh, it's again about that group with that name, and continue getting public keys for verifying signatures of flying messages. Just as a reminder, here we are considering scope as encoded, building on an AIF data format that we defined already in the previous version. Right? There are also some updates in the main parameter of the joining response, transporting the key material to a new joining member. We used to have a client ID parameter borrowed by the OSCORE security context object, and that parameter was removed from that object definition in the last update of the OSCORE profile. So we simply had to rename that parameter as group sender ID now, also registered as a new element of that object, but all in all keeping the same meaning. So the idea here is to provide the sender ID assigned to this joining node as a group member. Also, since in the group OSCORE document now we have the pairwise mode just stable, we have added here two additional parameters, again for the joining response, in case the pairwise mode is supported at all in the group, of course, to describe what algorithms and parameters are used when the pairwise mode has to be used to communicate in the group. And default values, just like for other parameters, are also defined in the corresponding section. And the moment we have introduced these parameters explicitly signaling the pairwise mode and how it is supposed to work, we didn't need any more a separate policy to tell that the group can rely on that mode as well. So we removed the signaling of the separate policy. Next slide, please. Right, some clarifications also on the Requiem process. It can happen, we said already, that the group member can request for a new sender ID from the group manager for a number of reasons. In that case, it's up to the group manager to decide what to do exactly. It can just provide a new sender ID, or instead rekey the whole group, or do both. So this possible set of alternatives have been clarified. Also, we have tried to align a bit better the group manager described here with requirements and non-reassignment policies already stated in the group OSCORE document, or the non-recycling of sender IDs and group IDs. There's been a discussion also earlier this week about this exact point at the core meeting. So something is going to be updated in the group OSCORE document. It will be reflected here when it comes to these details. And finally, we had a resource type registration for this joining resource that can be contacted by joining nodes to access the group. That used to be registered in another document in the core working group, and the actual registration was in fact moved here. And well, the resource type can, for instance, be useful for the sake of discovering joining resources, just sending a request to well-known, for instance. Next slide, please. Yeah, as a next step, I expect at least one more iteration to align this document with the planned changes in ACE-Group.com and with some things I also mentioned before in the group OSCORE document, for instance, about non-recycling policies of IDs. We've been continuing working on implementation, and the whole interface of the group manager is almost complete. I think only 3 operations are missing. We plan to have some tests. I can tick out Peter van der Stok and Christian Amsus especially in the near future. So possibly after that next version, this should be close to be considered, I hope, for a working group last call.
Ready or close?
Close to be conservative. If you and the group are all fine, well, we can more seriously consider it. Why not?
Any comment? So I think you have now another presentation on
the other interface at the group manager.
Yeah. I'm just trying to open it in the same.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, this is another interface we are describing at the very same group manager. This document was adopted following the previous IETF meeting. Next slide, please. All right, while in the previous presentation, we focused on the interface for joining nodes to access the group and get the key material. This interface on the group manager is instead intended for an administrator user that can create, configure, or delete OSCORE groups before they can start being operated. And overall, it's following a high-level resource pattern, very similar to the one intended for the co-op sub-broker. And right now, we are supporting operation and message exchanges both in link format and CBOR payload, or instead in Coral, with examples for both cases. So overall, for the sake of this interface, the group manager has one single instance of a group collection resource at the path, say, /manage, essentially including the list of existing OSCORE groups. And then for each existing OSCORE group, one group configuration resource, in fact, mentioned in that list. And each group configuration resource can be accessed as at /manage/ the name of the group, and it includes the current configuration for that OSCORE group. Here we have, again, the group manager as its resource server and the administrator acting as its client. So it still has to get an access token and post it as per ACE to prove to be authorized to take these actions at the group manager for these groups. Next slide, please. Yeah, just some more details on the resource and the interface. So on the left, you can see the possible operation on the root single group collection resource. What we have today is a post is sent to the group collection resource to create a new group, in fact. And already at this point in time, it's possible to provide a configuration for that group. Otherwise, default values apply. When a group is created, that practically means two things. For the sake of this actual document, a child group configuration resource is created, so including the configuration parameters for that group. At the same time, a totally different group membership resource is created. And that's for joining the group, according to the interface of the previously presented document. Issuing instead a GET request to this group collection resource, it's possible to get the full list of existing core groups, and well, actually the links to the corresponding group configuration resources as child resources. It's also possible to retrieve, however, just part of this list using fetch and specifying filter criteria for group configurations to match to have the group configuration resources returned in the list. On the right instead, just focusing on one instance here, operations on the group configuration resources, you can send a GET to retrieve the full configuration for that group, so all the parameters and values describing it at the moment. And now we have also introduced fetch in this update to retrieve only part of the configuration, so only parameters expressed in the fetch request. Right now we can more than update, I should say override altogether the current configuration of the group brutally with a put. We have plans to introduce patch also for a selective update, and issuing a delete to this resource instead was just destroy the group. So of course these non-safe operations have a side effect on the group and the group members that we are also describing in the document. Next slide, please. Right, in this particular update, related to what I mentioned before, also for the other document, now that the pairwise mode of group score is stable, we have already introduced configuration parameters here concerning the support for the pairwise mode in the group. So essentially a flag telling the group manager if that mode is supported or not, and well, if it is, more detailed parameters describing the algorithms and its parameters to be used for the sake of the pairwise mode. And default values to possibly applied are not defined here. They are defined in the previous application profile are presented, where we decided to collect all default values to consider. As I mentioned, we have also introduced the fetch method for the group configuration resources that we are supporting already, both in the CBOR and in the Coral case. So this is about retrieving just part of the configuration, so only parameters indicated in the fetch payload and the values. Overall, we have revised all the examples in the draft and included new ones, especially for this fetch handler, both in CBOR and Coral. Next slide, please. Right, we have also clarified this point, who take the final decision on the invariant once established group name. So we still have the possibility for the administrator asking to create a group to specify an intended group name, but then the final decision remains on the group manager that picks up a final group name also returned to the administrator in the response. And it seems to be the best way, and as also suggested by Christian, I think, at the discussion at the previous meeting, this is good because the administrator can have more constraints than, the group manager can have more constraints than the administrator can even imagine about going for a feasible group name. So it's good the group manager takes a final word on this. Also, we actually have extended the registration procedure, which practically means extending the creation of a new group request message, so that the administrator indicates to the group manager also the names of the application groups using this security OSCOR group. And this essentially aligns also operations following this draft. For instance, the registration of the security group in objects like a resource directory, so simplifying discovery of this security group and links for joining it to other nodes. It was also something already suggesting in a discussion in core related to Coral and Coral forms, but essentially makes the group manager aware of the application groups that are using or are going to use this security group. Next slide, please. That also clarifies this a bit more. Yeah, following the creation of a security group here, and now that the group manager has more information, the group manager or the administrator can in fact proceed registering the link to join the security group to separate entities, like for instance the resource directory. And now it's much better that the group manager knows also the names of the application groups involved, and they are in fact used as, for instance, target attributes in a particular approach we're describing for doing this in another core document. We also give overall guidelines about this process, and we do recommend that the group manager really does that. Because it's the one most likely to remain up to date on possible changes related to the OSCOR group, or even its own address and URI. They would require a refresh on what's registered in the resource directory. Otherwise, in principle, the administrator would be also in a position to do those same registrations. And speaking of which, we have also refined just the name of a previously registered resource type for the group collection resource. And we've also added the registration of the resource type for the group configuration resource as well in the IANA registration section. Next and final slide, I guess, please. Okay. Yeah, to summarize, new interface on the group manager for administrators to create, configure, and delete OSCOR groups. We have quite a good set of operations already to be continued and finalized. We have full support already for link format and CBOR or Coral operations and messages. As immediate next steps, we want to introduce the patch method to selectively update only part of the group configuration for an OSCOR group. We would like to focus also on defining a better format of scope, again using AIF. And there was early discussion at the hackathon of the previous IETF meeting, in fact, to express scope in terms of patterns of group names that can be created and possibly configured. This would open the way also to allow some actions, not necessarily all of them, also to other administrators coming in later on, also different from the exact administrator that did create the group. Also expanding on a previous discussion of Coral forms that I mentioned also in a previous slide, we can give some more guidelines when Coral is used in the response to the administrator following the registration, especially in case something went wrong, to guide the administrator on what's the correct way to proceed for a correct group creation in terms, for instance, of message format and API. And that should be all from my side. Thank you.
A lot of backup slides.
Yeah, you can skip them totally. It's just examples, just in case.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Christian?
I've seen in this document, but also in many other ACE documents, so this might be more general, a lot of resources that are given in the document with basically with a path that starts with /. So how is very generally best practice 190 about URI namespace ownership and path ownership treated here? Is this manage entry point supposed to be discovered? Is this a fixed path that might be considered for being a well-known path? So this applies here with /manage, but probably also applies to the group, probably everything else we've seen today.
As far as I know, we've been following the wording already from the ACE framework about this is a default example, or not even default, actually, just an example. Your implementation can go for something else. And we've been trying to use resource types to help discovery. And, well, the framework 2 versions ago, I think, introduced also a resource type for one of its resources to support discovery, I think. This should be the current status, at least, if I'm not missing anything.
Does that answer
Yes.
to your question?
I'll look through the document with a focus on this, but if this is a discovered entry point, it's it's probably okay. So I think there's a rough preference for things that don't give that static structure at all. But if this, but kind of if the structure is given under an entry point, it's probably okay as long as the entry point is discovered. Personally, I still prefer if the creation just returned a location, and that location is then the location of that thing, whether it's in a subpath or somewhere else. But that might be a matter of taste. The root resource is not.
To jump in, this is Ben Kidek as AD again. I think the intent is that in the document we refer to like a name of the endpoint, a descriptive name, and maybe the slides were not as careful about using the descriptive name instead of /name. But I think the documents tend to be more careful about that. And yes, we do try to reflect BCP 190, and I guess the revisions underway to BCP 190 make it easier to say that if the parent is discovered, then you can have fixed strings as the subpaths. And we should probably not dwell on that too much right now, because I think we do need to watch the clock. But thank you for bringing it up.
Okay. Any additional question? Comments? No. Checking the Jabber. No. So I guess now we move to the charter discussion, and then we will present with the remaining time the new topics.
Yes, and
so
the clock, we have just under an hour left, so
yeah,
we can of course discuss the charter as being a little bit more important, because depending on how the charter goes, we may or may not be able to do the new topics.
Yeah. So let's kick off the discussion. Has anyone, I mean, can you read the charter now if you haven't read it, and see how you agree with the suggestions? So let's read the first paragraph. I'm highlighting it. I'm gonna send the link to the Jabber. So Michael, please.
Hi, I was distracted by the BOF as well, but I'm reading this. I read it before. So the last part about EST COAP, well, so that's done. It's in the RFC editor's queue. You could, I think at this point, strike it from the charter, except for the question about someone would like to do CMP now. And I always thought it was weird to do this in this group in the first place. I don't know what to suggest there, but I think as it's currently written, restricted to EST, and we're done that work, you might as well strike it.
Okay, so I mean, you're talking about this spot, are you?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay.
So if it's restricted to EST, and so it really doesn't fit for CMP, then strike it. If you want to do other things, then other wording will be necessary. But at this point, it's done. You might as well strike it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, I think the important word was profile in here. But I see Göran.
All I'm saying is that as written, it's very narrow, and that work's already done. So either strike the sentence out because we're done, or expand it in some way there. Okay?
Okay.
So the previous
Göran?
paragraph I see says CMP, and that could say it or not, include it or not.
Yeah, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, this is Göran. So this, yes, what is done is EST over CoAP-S. But what is not done is EST protected by OSCOR and ad hoc. So that's, I think, the reason why this paragraph still could stay in the draft, in the charter.
So my question is maybe to Michael and Göran. Is profile not specific enough, and you would prefer clearly mentioning OSCOR?
Yeah,
I
so
suppose the tiger is Michael.
Text on top of it, and that's what I would suggest. Why don't you just start and end the sentence there, and not be CMP or EST or etc.
So this is Göran.
Yeah.
I disagree with the change here. I proposed this paragraph because we're done with one part of the EST profiling, but we are not done with the other part. So remind you about the ACE interim. This was discussed on the mailing list. There was an ACE interim 3 years ago where we discussed different profiles of the EST protocol. And one is done, but the other is not. So that's why I proposed a charter text which included both, to illustrate that we are working on this and we have more work to do. So I don't really know why we should take this out. We are halfway through the work.
What I'm trying to say is that I think that if we want to include enrollment protocols over COAP, then let's just say that and leave the details as to which ones elsewhere. Maybe the ISG won't like that, but that just seems simpler to me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Michael. Now I see what you're saying. I was a little bit locked in my own thoughts here. So yes, you're saying that with the change made now, we include all aspects of enrollment over COAP. Sorry.
Yeah, if someone wants to know which, we could put such as, but not limited to, right?
Yeah, this is fine. Go ahead.
Ben?
No, I was preparing to say something that I don't need to say anymore.
Okay. So, Hendrik?
Yeah. So I'm fine with that. As I read it, that it is the CMP over CoAP work is included as posted in the Jabra. So for CMP transport over CoAP, no profiling of CMP is needed. So it's just addressing the transport of the messages. So this is different to EST. So yeah, I would be fine.
Okay. So I am hearing that everyone agrees with the text. Now the thing is, I would like to, but this is my personal opinion. I would like to, the current charter does not mention CMP and EAST profile. So I am wondering, I would like to avoid to have that discussion again and again. So I'm wondering if we can agree on whether CMP is part of that work, as well as EST profiles. So Göran is, so I'm reading the chat. Screen share queue. Oh, okay.
So I guess we're not seeing too many more other comments queued up. So sounds like we should declare victory and go ahead and confirm this on the list.
Yeah. So, but my question was, I mean, we had some discussions between EST profiles and I mean, a bit mostly CMPv2 and EST profile, and I mean, none of those appear in the charter. So what I'm wondering if it would not be the time to clarify that both of these items are part of the charter.
So I think that Michael's phrasing about including but not necessarily limited to might be a useful way to get those in, because that would indicate that's what we have in mind now. But if there is potentially some other thing that comes up that we feel a need to work on, this would be an okay place to do such work, provided there's justification for actually doing it. We don't want to develop certificate enrollment protocols just for the fun of it, after all.
Yeah. Yeah, my purpose was just to avoid another discussion. Okay, so is the current text proposed by Henrik fine to Göran, Michael, Ben?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay.
I might wordsmith it slightly, but don't need to do that right now.
Okay. So my understanding is that the current text with all the I mean, is everyone is fine with that? Anyone having any comment? It's the time to say it. We will confirm that to the mailing list anyway. But I'm hearing everyone is fine. So thank you very much. And we can move to the next items. So I think it's Marco.
That's correct. Hi again.
So the group OS core profile. I mean, group OS core profile. There's too many Tiloka. Okay, I got it. Copy link.
Great, thank you. Thanks. This is a new proposed transport profile of ACE to use group OS core as security protocol to access resources of group members of an OS core group in an authorized way. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this? There are use cases where you want to have group communication and you want to secure it, for instance, with group OS core. And on the communication side, we are fine, and we have solution to enforce access control to access the group and get the key material to use GroupoScore in the group. That's essentially what we saw in the previous presentation today. We argued there's a separate domain to cover in terms of access control, though. If you use simply the document we saw before and you are authorized to get into the group, you do that and you get the key material. For very simple use cases, this is just fine. And you don't need to do anything more in particular for the sake of access control once in the group. Essentially, you can think that being in the group and having the keys and essentially having access to the messages gives also you access to any resource at any member of the group with any method. And again, this can be fine in some application. We just argue that it's not fine in general, where you may want to have different clients authorized to do different things at different group members to be considered as resource servers. Essentially, you have different classes of access rights for different clients. And sure, one can try to address this just creating several security groups, one for each class of access rights, but it would complicate management of groups and key material considerably, especially in case classes of access rights change over time, requiring change of group and possibly rekeying. So we started to think about something different. Next slide, please. So just to give examples, the first one is really a toy example, a simple home automation application, for example, when you may want to have some clients like kids only able to check the status of a lock, while parents are instead fine to both check and change the status of the lock. Or even a more simple detail, you may want locks to act only on resource servers and not to start opening and closing each other. So clearly not everyone can do anything at anyone else. A more real-life use case was also suggested by Dave Robin from BACnet, where they consider, in fact, different classes of clients in terms of intended privileges. So you may have some clients intended only for low privilege operations, another class of clients for doing both low and high privilege level of operation, and some clients only are supposed to change the minimum required level of operation at a given time. So clearly here as well, not everyone can do anything at anyone else in the group. Next slide, please. Right, so as I mentioned before, we see two different domains of access control here. One is about being authorized to get into the group and get the keys, which practically means having access to the messages. That's fine, and that's covered with other works we also saw today. The second domain that we argue should be addressed separately instead, in general, is about once in the group, having authorized access with fine-grained access control at the resources of other group members. And of course, one can think of using ACE and the access tokens for that. So you need a profile. Well, the current profiles around don't cover access control with secure group communication in the domain I'm really addressing here. The closest thing we can have is the OSCORE profile, but of course, it considers the OSCORE protocol, not GroupoScore, so it doesn't really target group communication. So it seems we are missing a transport profile with fine-grained access control and supporting secure group communication practically with the GroupoScore protocol. Next slide, please. And that's essentially the proposal of this document. So it describes a new transport profile using GroupoScore as security protocol between the client and resource servers as already members of the group. And I'll come back to this point, but we have tried to clarify as best as possible the timeline here in the document. So The client and resource servers considered here are already group members. The joining happened first for both of them according to the approach of the document presented earlier today. After that, all this can happen to enforce access control in accessing resources of group members. And here we practically have the access token issued in this profile bound to the GrupoScore security context. And we achieve the typical properties you can also achieve in other profiles. So there's proof of possession of the client signature key, meaning the signature key used in the OSCOR group. That's achieved by the resource server when receiving a first request from the client, and it works both for the group mode or pairwise mode of GrupoScore already. The resource server can achieve proof of group membership, so to say. So it can actually check that the client is indeed a member of that OSCOR group. And there's also mutual authentication that is, of course, achieved only when a full exchange is completed, like in the OSCOR profile, by the way. Next slide, please. So this up.
Check.
Please, Ben.
Do you plan to just do the updates, or do you also plan to do the protocol overview?
Updates mostly, I would say.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Please continue.
Yeah. A number of updates have been included in this latest version. As I mentioned, we clarified the timeline that was mostly requested by Ben, actually, in the Singapore meeting last year. So this is really about something for nodes that are already group members. The join has to happen first. Then we have considerably simplified the profile and the workflow of the protocol itself, thanks to input from Joran. So now the document really focuses on the GrupoScore protocol only for secure communication between clients and servers. And the public key that the client uses in the group is in fact used as a proof of possession key. And that simplified the workflow overall and also the message format and their processing. Still, we added an appendix, including what used to be the original version of this profile, and considering both OSCOR and GrupoScore and security protocol. So in addition to that, you would also have the possibility to establish a pairwise OSCOR security context between a client and the resource server. As I said, it's an appendix for now. If not worthwhile or relevant enough, can be easily removed. But that appendix now is also aligned with details of the latest version of the OSCOR profile, by the way, just for the sake of alignment. Next slide, please. Yeah, if time does not allow, I can skip the protocol overview, but it just follows the basic ACE workflow, and yeah, some more information has to be provided into the token request, and that's also echoed in the token. But again, we can skip these details if you want.
Yeah, I think it's probably most expedient to skip the details today. We do have a few other presentations we want to hear from.
But this is the core of the proposal, essentially. So checking this at a high level, a client is interested to access with fine-grained access control resources that two group members, RS1 and RS2. Here it gets a token for RS1. Just some of the new information added here are also in the slide. So first token is received and posted and confirmed. Next slide, please. Yeah, the same happens to get a token for RS2, also posted to RS2. Next slide, please. Yeah, and following that, the client can send a request in GrupoScore, in this example over multicast, and in group mode received by the two resource servers. They each reply with one response in GrupoScore that can be either group mode or pairwise mode. And I said before, for either mode, proof of possession is achieved at the resource server, either by directly verifying a counter signature or decrypting the message in the first place using the pairwise key derived out of the asymmetric keys of the two nodes. Next slide, please. Yeah, it's a new transport profile of ACE to bring fine-grained access control as per ACE plus GrupoScore security protocol. And we still have an appendix describing an old version with both OSCORE and Group OSCORE security protocol. So these changes incorporated mostly comments from Ben and Göran. And as next step, we would like to give guidelines on how, given the main mode with the Group OSCORE only, the client can possibly go separately for an execution of the OSCORE profile as is, in case it has also second thought later on and wants also pairwise context with that resource server. And of course, we'd welcome comments and document reviews.
Any comment? So, because we are somehow running out of time, I propose that we move to the next presentation, which is Göran.
Okay. Hello,
so
everybody.
Now we know it's in scope.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. I mean,
Great.
at least me.
I got some error message here, so I got a bit nervous. So good morning, everyone. Göran Selander. I'm, so the title slide showed the co-authors of this proposal. So this is as I mentioned in the charter discussion, a way to do certificate enrollment protected with ad hoc and OSCORE. And it builds on other drafts. We already mentioned today CMS and CMC, which Jim Shard worked on behalf of enrollment of secure transport, and then the draft, which is soon for publication, the EST Co-op S draft protecting EST payloads over DTLS and Co-op. And this draft is closely following that draft, but replacing DTLS with ad hoc and OSCORE. Next slide, please. This is saying more or less the same thing. We have the EST request response messages, which are the same, and we replace the security or complement security with security on co-op or HTTP layer, and then running over various transports. Next slide, please. It's section by section copying stuff from EST or referencing the Co-op S profile of EST. You see here discovery, the functions, the payload formats, message bindings, response codes, and the delayed responses, which is defined in that draft, introduced in that draft, and then fragmentation. Next slide, please. And it also adds some features. So we have a new resource type attribute in the discovery to show that this profile is supported. We have started to define one new EST operation to request raw public keys-based trust anchors. And we have an appendix defining CBOR encoding of EST payload. So you could actually use, you could have a certificate signing request in CBOR, and you could also have a certificate in CBOR as defined in another draft. So that means that you don't need to use any ASN1 encoding at all in the constrained device. And there are some other optimizations following from using ad hoc, as it has some lightweight features. Next slide. And another feature with OSCORE is that we don't need to make any assumptions on the co-op HTTP proxy. So the realistic scenario will have a constrained EST client, perhaps only supporting co-op, and a EST server, perhaps only supporting HTTP. So you need to proxy the enrollment request. And with the use of OSCore, you don't need to do anything EST related in the proxy. So you could actually just pass it on, and then you could get end-to-end security. And that's the next slide. The last slide is next steps. We need to complete the additions on the new EST function, submit a new version. We think it's fairly similar to the EST Co-op S, but we'd like to have reviews, of course, see what people think about the additions and how this fits into the settings, the use cases you are working on. So any comments, questions?
Any comment, questions? I'm hearing none. So, oh, Ben.
This is a great chance to see if we can get anyone on the record as saying that they will review the document, even if they don't have any comments right now.
So your question is, who has reviewed the document?
Or who plans to review the document?
All right, that's even better. Yeah. Any volunteers? Michael says, I think I'm involved already. He's not formally an author, but yes. Yes, Michael has been in the discussion for a while as well. So, but if you have any other comments, unless you have already provided your comments, that would be very, very helpful, Michael.
Then maybe we can also ask the question. So I think we are over with this presentation, and we so Francesca said she will review. Ben, do you want to ask that question also for the previous presentation?
Let's just see if people can type that in Jabber. I don't think we should try and get the live audio for that part.
Okay, so let's move to the second presentation from Garen.
Okay, thanks. So here is another draft making use of ad hoc and the lightweight properties of ad hoc. In this case, this is a way to combine authorization and authentication in a lightweight manner. So these are my co-authors, and please take the next slide. So I can easily spend more than 10 minutes here, but I suppose I won't, since Ben has asked us to be a little bit more restrictive on time. There's a lot of arrows and colors in at least in the first slides. So I'll try to.
So just to let you know, we have one more presentation, which is for the revoke token notification, which is 10-15 minutes. So you have roughly 10-15 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to make it in 10. Or I will make it in 10. So the setting here is the device join, say the onboarding of a device in a network, which has been described in different contexts. Enrollment over secure transport has one description. You have the brewski, and there are many other settings. And you have typically a number of phases in this procedure. There is an authentication phase. There is an authorization phase, which can can happen in parallel, but sometimes in sequence. And it might involve a trusted party, like the authorization server. And then there might be, as in EST, an enrollment phase where you enroll a local certificate with the network you're joining. And the problem statement is about this doing things in sequence, which adds latency, and you pass the same data in different phases, and also that you don't always make use of the fact that you may have the internet behind the authenticator in this case. So you don't need to pass so much data really over the constraint. Next slide, please. So we have the blue, the red, and the black phase here. And in the next slide, we see that we can combine them actually in a more efficient way. So this is just an example of how to...
You just buried your microphone and you are brushing on it all the time.
Sorry, Karsten, I didn't hear you.
You just buried your microphone, so we didn't hear you. And you're brushing on it all the time, so you may try to keep it free of your clothing.
Okay, thank you very much. There's something touching. Is this better?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so as I was saying, try to say is that there is an option to make these phases more parallel, and that's the scope of this presentation. So here is a slide showing how different components can be, different drafts can be used to make this more efficient. We see the ad hoc exchange, the blue messages, and we see the enrollment, the black box and the black messages. That was previous draft described here in this session. But the scope of this presentation is the red box and the red arrows. So that's, if you take the next slide, Daniel. So it's actually the question, how can we make authorization in parallel to authentication in a lightweight way? And in this case, we are using the ad hoc protocol, and we carry authorization-related information in the auxiliary data. It's over the constrained link, and then we have an exchange in the backend with the trusted third party, the authorization server. And in this way, we can reuse the data, public keys, and identifiers in the authentication protocol for the authorization process, which makes it more lightweight. And we can transport credentials over the unconstrained link instead of the constrained. Next slide, please. So here are more arrows and colors. So if you look at the assumptions, it's basically we introduced the U, V, and W here to have easier notation. We have no prior trust relationship between the device and the authenticator. It's basically the setting with the device onboarding. It's a device coming from the factory. We do have a trust relationship between the device and the trusted third party. That's exactly what we're using here. Authorization server could be, in the Brewski case, it's the manufacturer authorization service, or it could be some other trusted third party. And V and W only have sort of a web-based trust, so that they could look up, have some implicit trust anchors, and they could verify their certificates. So the actual interaction, sort of on a sketchy level, is that U is providing information like an encrypted blob with a locator to W in the ad hoc auxiliary data. And that's locator is like a URI, and the authenticator can then set up TLS based on certificates with the authorization server, and in that interaction pass on the encrypted data from the device as well as its public key and the proof of possession that it's going to use for authenticate to you in the ad hoc protocol. With this information, the authorization server can sort of based on its trust relationship with the device, it can decrypt the identifier of the device and look up the certificate and provide the certificate of the device back to the authenticator. It can also verify the proof of possession of the public key and construct an access token or a voucher in form of a MAC, which is then going back to the device in the second message of ad hoc. So as the ad hoc protocol runs, the device will get the public key of the authenticator, and at that point, with the help of the voucher, it can authenticate and authorize the network. And in the third message, the device is supposed to pass its credential or identifier of a credential to the authenticator, but in this case, that credential has already been established through the communication with a trusted third party. So the authenticator can use that certificate to authenticate the device.
Ben?
Yeah.
So just to check that I'm understanding here, the authenticator V is sort of playing the role kind of like a join proxy for the Brewski terminology?
Yes, like a registrar in the Brewski terminology. So it's the network.
Doesn't think he means the join, like the registrar. You mean the join proxy? Yes, that would be necessary, and is not shown.
So sorry. Yes, it's not. So there is a join proxy, which essentially is the first point of contact with the network. That's somewhere on the constraint link. So that's not in this picture. The authenticator would be the registrar, which is sort of the backend, which actually communicates with the trusted third party.
Okay, thanks for helping me understand. I'm also trying to capture it in the CodeEMD.
Right, thanks. Okay, next slide. So this, we think this could be useful, this protocol in different settings. And in this graph, we provide a mapping to ACE. So if you compare if we map the authenticator to the client, the device to the constraint device to the resource server, and the authorization server to the authorization server, we get something like this. And if you look at the assumptions, it seems to match what the assumptions are for ACE. We don't assume a prior trust relationship between client and resource server. The RS provides information about location of the AS to C, and that's the AS request creation hints. The RS and the AS, on the other hand, they have a strong trust relationship. In this case, sharing by the RS having the public key of AS, and the AS can look up information about the RS and provide that to the client. Whereas the relationship between the client and the authorization server is not strictly specified in the ACE framework, and one way of resolving that is some sort of web-based trust. So the assumptions match, and also the protocol can be made to match fairly well. So the AS request creation hints typically are in response to a request from a client. In this case, there is no prior request, so it's basically just preemptively providing this information to the client, which can then post a token containing post to /token containing this information provided by the device and the authorization server can respond with access information, in this case, the certificate of the RS, and also an access token, which is, in this case, is the voucher. And that's passed back to the device. So this would be then an ACE profile over ad hoc in this case. So that's one way of embodying this communication between client and resource server. Next slide, please. So I'm wrapping up. There's 2 more slides. This is just so there was a lot of arrows in the previous pictures. The actual content of the draft, which is of course work in progress still, is that we produce 2 new auxiliary data types for ad hoc, which contains this information that needs to be carried between client and authenticator, between device and authenticator, sorry. And there is what Michael called an ultra-constrained voucher, matching the Brusky terminology, which is just a MAC of this data that comes from the authentication server, authorization server, sorry. And then the exchange of data between the authenticator and the authorization server, which is independent of transport, but there is an ACE mapping described in this draft. And then some security processing. Next slide. So yes, we are still need to specify the crypto context and how the details of the integrated encryption scheme can we use HPKE or not in this setting, which that would be nice. So that's basically what we have. And yeah, there are some questions. Do we have any known implementations of this? There are plans, definitely, to implement. I don't know if Michael wants to say more of what exists and what does not exist. Ben also commented that RFC, yeah, the voucher RFC can be useful for more than just Brusky. And if someone wants to say anything about that, that would be great. Maybe Michael is the right person here. Bear in mind now, Michael, that I've already taken all the time for this presentation.
Okay, Michael, do you want to say something? Yeah. Go, Michael.
The question, so I don't know what you're asking, and we have no time. So.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, to answer all, yes, there is implementation plans here, and we'll please. We can talk about that offline. I can send more information. I didn't hear Michael's statement, but
saying that if the question was, am I implementing, then the answer is yes.
Okay, thanks for me. Thank you.
So you're implementing this draft?
Yes, I am, 6% into doing it, but yes, I am working on it. Don't expect it done by Friday, okay?
Okay. So next Friday. Marco.
Yes, thank you again. Final presentation. This work was presented last time at the June interim we had, I think. The problem we are addressing is that access tokens can be revoked before their intended expiration time for a number of reasons. Clients or resource servers compromised, the policies of their outcome have changed, or the ACE profile to use with that token has changed. And we are trying to address the problem of let both the client and the resource server know about such early revoked tokens. And for that, we are defining one resource and related interface at the authorization server. So there we keep one single token revocation list, where we include identifiers of revoked tokens that are not expired yet, not identifiers in the sense of the existing CTIs, but more hashes of those tokens, to put it simple. And then both the client and the resource servers can can retrieve that list or get and observe that list to receive automatic notifications in case anything changes. And to be precise, here the client and the resource server can obtain from the authorization server only the part of that list that really pertains themselves. So for example, a client can get only this kind of information for the tokens it has received in the first place. And this complements the already available, of course, token introspection at the authorization server, and it doesn't require at all any new endpoint on the client or the resource server. Next slide, please. Right. As I mentioned, the identifiers we use for tokens here are hashes, computing just following the binary format of 6920, so naming things with hashes, I think. The exact resource at the authorization server then is essentially a CBOR array, including a list of token hashes. So a new token hash is added to the list when a token is revoked, and is then later on removed when that token eventually expires. The interactions are pretty simple upon registering at the authorization server. However, that happens in detail. It's not defined here or anywhere really. The client and resource server will get the exact URL to that TRL resource at the authorization server. And then, as I said, they can send requests for the pertaining portion of that list or observe it for changes. But we are actually admitting a special requester, like an administrator, that can, in fact, get back the full content of that list. So right now, we have two different modes of operations. In full query mode, you can get back, in fact, all the pertaining portion of the list and the related token hashes included there. In diff query mode, you can instead get back a set of most recent updates that happen to that part of the list pertaining to you. And we have recently improved that based on feedback we got. Next slide, please. So since version 1 that was presented, in fact, in the June interim, now we are in version 3. The latest version especially addresses review comments from Karsten posted on the list after that interim, and comments we got from Ben also during that same interim. So we clarified even better, providing examples what we exactly take as input for the hash processing when computing the token hash, considering the case where the token has been transported in CBOR or in JSON instead. And based especially on Karsten feedback, we have simplified the interface and the message format for the diff query mode. So now we have a single query parameter that specifies the number of requested most recent updates in the response, and the response payload that used to be based on CBOR maps now is essentially an array. So the outer payload, the overall payload is an array, including the different updates happen to the list as individual elements that are in turns array. And then for each update, we specify which token hashes have been added or removed, especially for that update. Next slide, please. So other than that, following a recommendation from Ben, when the initial registration happened at the authorization server, what's returned is not only the exact URL to this list resource, but also the identifier of the exact hash algorithm used. And we've also added more interaction examples. We used to have only one in full query mode. We added two in diff query mode, also using observation, in fact. We also added two big appendices. The first one follows Karsten's review, where he was suggesting to check the series transfer pattern. Well, it was right. That was also inspiring. And in Appendix A, we describe how the diff query mode proposed here is, in fact, an instance, an example of usage of that series transfer pattern. And we define the alignment more in detail. But Ben also had some more comments again during that interim. He said that the diff query mode was something useful, but probably something even more can be done. So rather than asking for the n most recent updates to the list, it would be good to ask also for the n updates following a certain point in time. For instance, the last interaction happened some hours, some days before, and that should cover also the case where that point in time is now gone because it became stale. It just had to be removed from the AS, and that should push the requester back to issue a new request in full query mode. And this can actually become a third mode of its own. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we took that into account, and that's why we introduced a new Appendix B, where we believe we are, in fact, defining this possible third mode of operation suggested by Ben, further building on the series transfer pattern, and in particular of its cursor sub-pattern. So the idea is that now, based on this extension, if a full or diff query requests are sent, the response includes also cursor, which is a pointer to the latest update happened or the latest one included in that particular response. And then just following the cursor pattern from the STP document, that allows the requester to resume exactly from where interrupted. And it also allows, in this case, the authorization server to possibly do transfers in batches, so addressing possible latency requirements. And we are also handling some corner cases here, like, well, there's no update yet, so the cursor is a bit floating, or the cursor is pointing to the end of the list already, or the cursor is pointing to something that was deleted, and the requester just have to restart from a full query mode. Yeah, and to wrap up, we have the interface defined, also considering observation as initial intention for unsolicited information of revoked tokens. This latest version, as I mentioned, included especially a review from Carsten and comments from Ben, but further builds on an earlier review on the list from Travis Spencer and comments and discussion from Jim. As immediate next step, we would like to try to move that Appendix B to the document body as an actual third mode of operation, like an enhanced diff query mode. And all considering the current status and the previous review we got in the address, we were thinking if this can be considered for adoption call in the working group.
Okay, thank you, Marco. Unless there are any comments, I'm going to take the 2 last minutes to provide some next steps for the working group. So what I'm planning to do is an interim meeting on a monthly basis, as we used to do. I think that was pretty much productive. I think the working group, before any adoption, we should start focusing on finalizing the work that is being in progress. So I have in mind the current working group documents, and the other track for us is to reach out as soon as possible. So I'm going to send the charter on the mailing list, and then I think that's going to be on Ben's part to move that to the ISG. I don't know if Ben has anything to say now.
So I would just add thank you to Daniel for taking on the full load of chairing all by yourself. I am, as I mentioned on the list, working to get you a co-chair as soon as we can, but I appreciate that you have been keeping things running while it's just been you. So thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I think the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for attending that meeting, and see you soon on the mailing list. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.